What if I told you the American Civil War wasn't just fought by famous generals and in iconic battles like Gettysburg or Antietam? What if the real story of the war was hidden in the forgotten struggles of everyday people? The courageous souls who fought not just for a cause, but for their families, their homes, and their very freedom? Behind every line of battle, behind every moment of victory and defeat, are countless stories of bravery, sacrifice, and betrayal that most people never hear. It's time to uncover these forgotten heroes and untold moments that didn't make the history books, but forever shaped the fate of a nation. Before the first shots were fired, the American Civil War was brewing for decades. The nation was built on the idea of freedom, yet a fundamental contradiction lay at its core: the institution of slavery. While the North became increasingly industrialized and anti-slavery, the South remained heavily dependent on agriculture, particularly cotton, and slavery was the lifeblood of their economy. By the 1850s, tensions were at an all-time high. The election of Abraham Lincoln as the 16th president in 1860 sent shockwaves through the South. Lincoln was anti-slavery, and the South feared that his presidency would spell the end of their way of life. In response, 11 Southern states would eventually secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America under Jefferson Davis. This division of the nation was not just about politics. It was about deep-rooted cultural, economic, and ideological differences. On April 12, 1861, the first shots of the Civil War rang out at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, as Confederate forces attacked the Union garrison. The battle wasn't just a military engagement. It was a declaration of war. Over the next few years, the conflict would stretch across the vast landscape of the United States, from the North's industrial cities to the South's fertile plantations. While the North had significant advantages, such as a larger population and greater industrial capacity, the South had its own strengths. Superior military leadership, including figures like General Robert E. Lee, and a fierce determination to defend their way of life. While the leaders of the Civil War, such as Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee, are well known, countless individual stories have been lost in time. Some of these hidden heroes fought bravely on both sides, often against incredible odds. For example, Clara Barton, a nurse and volunteer for the Union, would go on to found the American Red Cross after her experiences during the war. Her tireless work in field hospitals, tending to the wounded and dying, has often been overshadowed by the larger events of the war. But her contributions to wartime medicine were nothing short of heroic. On the Confederate side, Robert Smalls, an enslaved man, became an unlikely hero. In 1862, Smalls hijacked a Confederate ship, the CSS Planter, and sailed it to Union forces, handing over valuable intelligence to the North. Smalls would later become a congressman, a testament to his courage and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. While soldiers fought and died on the front lines, the war had a devastating impact on civilians, particularly in the South. The Union's Anaconda Plan, a strategy to block southern ports and cut off vital supplies, meant that families in the South suffered from starvation and disease. In cities like Atlanta, entire neighborhoods were destroyed in Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864. This was a scorched earth campaign intended to break the South with a fight by destroying infrastructure, farms, and factories. But the South wasn't the only region affected. In the North, women and children had to step up to fill the roles of men who had gone off to war. Factory workers, especially in the textile industry, found themselves working longer hours to support the Union Army. In some cases, entire communities were thrust into the war effort, their lives completely transformed. While many focus on major battles like Gettysburg and Antietam, there were numerous lesser-known skirmishes that had profound effects on the war. One such battle was the Battle of Shiloh, fought in April 1862 in Tennessee. Over 23,000 casualties were reported after just 2 days of brutal fighting. Shiloh was a wake-up call for both sides. No one was prepared for the magnitude of the carnage that would unfold in the coming years. Another pivotal moment in the war was the Siege of Vicksburg, which lasted from May 18th to July 4th, 1863. The Union, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, cut off the Confederate stronghold and forced its surrender, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and effectively splitting the Confederacy in half. After 4 long years of brutal fighting, the war began to wind down. The Confederacy, exhausted and outmanned, could no longer sustain the fight. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses South Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, effectively ending the war. But while the Confederacy had fallen, the wounds of war would take generations to heal. The Civil War ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing millions of enslaved people in the South. But the effects of the war went far beyond the abolition of slavery. The war shaped the identity of the United States, determined the future of its government, and began the slow process of rebuilding the South. Yet the untold stories of the Civil War, those of the civilians who lived through it, the heroes who fought against all odds, and the personal sacrifices made by so many, have been overshadowed by the more well-known narratives. The legacy of the war is more than just North versus South. It's about the courage, loss, and resilience of a nation that was forever changed by the bloodshed of its own people. The Civil War wasn't just a battle between two sides, it was a fight for the very soul of the United States. And while many of the key events are well known, it's the forgotten stories that truly capture the depth of the struggle. The sacrifices made, the heroism displayed, and the tragedies endured shaped America into the nation it is today. The stories of these unsung heroes remind us that, while history often glorifies the famous battles, it's the ordinary individuals who carry the weight of the war and whose stories deserve to be remembered